Greetings, friends. Wandingruski here, and this is the weekly Russian-Ukrainian war update for the week of December 11th through 17th of 2023. And this week we have a lot of updates, and I mean a lot. The Russians are now on the offensive. They are on the offensive basically along the entire front. And almost on every single part of the front we have some updates. And so we will begin this week with, and most of the biggest updates are coming on the Donetsk front. And the Donetsk front is huge, so we'll take these in pieces. The first, we'll talk about the Avdiivka front, one of the center points of the Russian offensive in the last 2 months. The first thing we want to mention is that the Russians have finally this week broken through into the residential area of Avdiivka here. The residential areas where all the little houses are at. As we mentioned about 2 weeks ago, the Russians took full control over the industrial zone. And the village, the little like dachas near it. And now, this week, they did an offensive that broke through from this new position into the residential area. Right now, the fighting is going over, I cannot pronounce this, but, you know, Yaskanivka Street and Yusulivka Street, these streets right here. So these two streets are what the Russians have been fighting for, and this week I think that's what they've been trying to have as a foothold to expand their operations. And so, what does this mean? Like, is that obviously besides updating you on that the Russians have entered the residential areas? Why? Like, what's the purpose of this? Well, here's what's going to happen. And this week, I actually have the Ukrainian live map here. Not because I think it's good, but because I think I could draw shit here. So, let us begin here. So if we look here from the, they have captured the industrial zone, and now we can see that the Russians are in these two streets. These are the residential areas. So what happens when, so let me go back to this area. So there's these two strong points that the Ukrainians still have in that holds the southern defense of Avdiivka. The Tsar's Hut and the ex-air defense base, air military base here. These two areas prevent the Russians from attacking from the south. What happens here, if the Russians are able to continue developing their offensive in the residential area, is the Ukrainians will they'll be able to get to behind these, they'll be able to get behind these these strong points. The Russians can't attack them head on, but they can attack them from, cut them off from behind, and that will force the Ukrainians to give up those positions. So the ex-air defense place is around here, and the Tsar's Hut is somewhere right here. And so what the Russians will be able to do is they'll be able to, God damn it, am I not allowed to make a, oh, there we go. This is not I haven't used this in a while. Anyway, they'll be able to go basically in this direction. And so as you can see in this area, sorry for the amateurish thing, but once they have entered this area of the residential area, and they'll be able to get to the back of these two defense areas here, and basically be able to. And once they clear this residential area, the Ukrainians will be forced to retreat. And the next area that the Ukrainians will have is this micro district of high-rise buildings. We can see it right here. You can see on the map here all these high-rise buildings. And basically, the Ukrainians will fall back to this area of the industrial. I have it here, actually, in my Twitter thread. I actually make Twitter threads for this area. So I make a Twitter thread of the war before I make this video, just for the sake of, it helps me delve into what's happened in the wars to give me a refresher. I follow it every day, but it's... it just helps me put it into a concise form. So as you can see here, the circles in red are the strong points, and the arrows are where the Russians will be attacking. And as you can see, this black line that I drew here is generally where the Ukrainians will fall back to if the Russians aren't stopped in this residential area. And why here is because these high-rise buildings, basically, if the Russians want to start attacking more north of this residential area, the Ukrainians on the western side will have the height advantage here, because they could they could spot things from the high-rise buildings, and it'll be easier for the Ukrainians to have a little bit of an advantage here. This breakthrough into the residential area is very important for the Russians. We saw this that they were going to do that, and if they could develop that offensive and get behind this, the southern front will collapse. And not only that, they will also lose the filtration system as well, which is the most important thing in the world. Yeah, so the southern part is developing in Russia's favor, and we'll have to see how the Russian develops their offensive in the south. So we'll have to see how that goes. Next thing, next thing is that another big thing that's changed is in the northern part. And so we've been talking about Stepova a lot. Ever since the Russians managed to do their main offensive back in October, they took the Terrakon, they advanced a lot into the rail line and developed their positions here. And then in November, they started clashes for the village of Stepova. And however, the Russians have been kind of in a pickle here. For about a month, the front line in this has changed a little bit, but it's been very hard for the Russians to develop their offensive from Stepova to continue the encirclement of Avdiivka from the north. And this week, however, they actually managed to finally, from the looks of it, secure. And how did they do that? Well, because they've entered Stepova before, but they've always been pushed back, or this village has been basically in the gray zone. Now, and how did they manage to basically take most of it? Well, apparently, I don't know why they didn't think about this earlier, because the Russians definitely had the ability to do so. The Russians managed to take this tree line up to the north of Stepova here, and basically develop this flanking area, develop this as the northern flank of Stepova. They also have positions in the southern part of Stepova in this tree lines right here. So the Russians focused on taking these two areas, and they were able to secure it. And once these flanks were secured, the Russians were able to develop their offensive and actually basically take most of Stepova. And so I think the westernmost edge of Stepova is in the gray zone technically, because I don't think the Russians have positions directly on this area because it's too close to the Ukrainian lines. But basically the Russians have the center and the eastern part of the village. Yeah, so we can see that there, and so it looks like they finally secured Stepova, unless they have to fall back again. But since they secured the flanks, it's more secure. It's not just they entered the village and the Ukrainians could pummel them from every which way, and then they have to be forced back to the rail line. So this is a more stable position, and if they could keep it, then they have basically a solid bridgehead to consolidate on the other side of the rail line, where they could then attack. And where will they attack? So I have another map here that I made, just some arrows just to give some ideas. Once they have this stable bridgehead over the rail line, which they've been trying to develop for the last month, there'll be three operations. One, they'll continue the attack towards Berezhji, but they will not. I don't think they're going to try to take it. They obviously want it, but it's not going to be like a like the main thrust. They're going to do a pinning attack in Berezhji here. They will also try to do an attack to continue squeezing the industrial coke plant here. The Russians are obviously, as we can see here, they're also pushing to the south of the Terrakon, and they're trying to sweep through these dachas in the north of Avdiivka. And basically, this will allow the Russians to attack, to start encircling Avdiivka from the north as well. The Avdiivka coke plant from the north, I should say. And because this is one of the other strong fortified areas of the Ukrainians, besides the micro-district of high-rise buildings here. So this bridgehead on the Stepova front basically allows them to have a position where they could now pin Ukrainian troops with attacks in Berezhji, and then the main Russian effort will go to the south, basically through these tree lines. And the main purpose of this is to put under direct fire control the last supply routes that go to Avdiivka, because if the Russians are able to, say, entrench themselves on these tree line positions here, the Russians will then put this road under direct visible control, and probably this as well. I need to see the reference, how, if the Russian troops are here, can they can they actually put this under control? But yeah, these are the two last lines of this is the main road that the Ukrainians use. But this road will be under direct visual, fire control. This will be under more heavy fire control, and basically meaning that supplies will have to take the risk of being blown up on their way there. And the closer the Russians are here, the more easier it is for the Russians to blow it up. So maybe, because maybe right now, it might be 1 out of 10 gets blown up, but maybe once they're here, it's 1 out of 5, and that hampers the supply. Because even if they don't completely cut off supply, if they cut off supply by say half, that still affects the Ukrainian defenses in Avdiivka. This is the Rybar map, by the way. Of Avdiivka, we can see the advancement of the Russians away from the industrial zone into the residential areas. You could see the air defense and the Tsar's hut here, and we could see the Russian bridgehead developing in Stepova here. So yeah, that's Avdiivka. The Russians have made a lot of good progress here, and in the south and in the north, and we will see how that develops continuously in the next few weeks. But basically, this has been kind of like the main focus. But there's been other areas of this front where the Russians have that have made a lot of success. And one of the places I want to talk about is Bakhmut, and this is where the Russians had a surprise of success. I think after the failure of the counteroffensive, they realized that this is a very because one of the big things the Western sources had that didn't really like about it was that they're like, why are you wasting time in Bakhmut when you could have attacked in Zaporozhye? And the whole reason was pride. Bakhmut was the first the major Russian gain ever since the end of the Battle of Severodonetsk and Lysychansk over a year and a half ago. And so the Ukrainians wanted to delete that. They wanted to say, hey, after you won in Severodonetsk and Lysychansk, we want to have continuous wins. So because after that, they won in Kharkov, they won in Kherson. They did not want the Russians to win in Bakhmut, and they wanted to win in Zaporozhye. And so, they wanted to delete all Russian progress, but that failed. And so after that, I think they pulled troops away from here to defend more important areas like Avdiivka. And they actually made more progress in this area. So in the Bakhmut front, the Russians are expanding their control to, in this area right here. This is a little bit of a hilly area right here. In this area, this is what they call the Road of Life for Bakhmut. And this is the area that the Russians Wagner was trying to take before the end, but they never were able to fully take it before the fall of Bakhmut. And the Russians are now taking, it's like right here. They're still clearing this area right here, but they took the autodrome here, they call it, the car racing track. They actually expanded further south from Kromova. And basically they are advancing in these fields and taking this kind of trench line here that the Ukrainians developed so they could stop the Russians from taking this road. So they're clearing that, and they basically are they basically have already taken it, and so the Ukrainians have to fall back to like the cemetery tree line area. And the purpose of this, and also the Russians are advancing along this rail line more, and they are now also in the outskirts of Bogdanovka as well. So the whole purpose of this is to not only flank Bogdanovka from the, because this is on the lowland and a very elongated village, but if the Russians could flank it from the east here, and then also they'll probably try to attack the fortified hill here to the west of Bogdanovka. This is one of the core areas that the Russians need to take in order to continue their main offensive. What's the whole purpose of the Bakhmut offensive? I think it's not just to delete Ukrainian progress, but I think the Russians want to restart not just to push the Ukrainians back from Bakhmut, but to put themselves in a better position. What does that mean? That means putting themselves along the Sovietsky Donetsk Canal, which gives them a solid defense position, and also to begin preparations for an offensive on Chasiv Yar. I don't think once the Russians clear that out, that they'll begin the battle for Chasiv Yar. I think that's something for next year. But I think right now they're trying to clear the Ukrainians from being able to actually, they want to stop the Ukrainian, have any Ukrainian push on Bakhmut, end that charade for good, and push them on the other side of the canal. That means taking Bogdanovka. That means taking Klishevka and Andriivka. The Russians are still developing their positions on the north, on the hills here, and basically this is putting enormous stresses on Ukrainian positions in Klishevka and Andriivka, and some sources are saying the Ukrainians are planning a fall back to the canal. So and we can see the Rybar map here about what the Russians are planning on doing. We could see, and another thing that the Russians did is they're advancing on the north. It's kind of like in Avdiivka. There's a north, south, and north and south position. The northern positions are obviously where the most success are, but the south is also having a lot of success. Another thing is the center part. The Russians also did an offensive. They managed to capture this tree line. So this basically gives them a position beyond the center, beyond Bakhmut itself, where they could have a position to begin attacks for Ivanivska here. This village right here is the center for Ukrainian operations in Bakhmut. It's where the Ukrainians had the center for this is where they would attack south to attack in the south of Bakhmut, and also to the north, trying to encircle Bakhmut. And so I kind of had it in my Twitter thread here. I could show you what's going on. They're going to try to reach the canal. That's the main goal of this Russian Bakhmut offensive, but the end goal of it's going to end with attack on three sides in Ivanivska. From the south, once the Klishevka and Andriivka falls. To the north, once they clear out the main trench line that's to the east of Bogdanovka, which they're doing right now, and then obviously directly from Bakhmut itself in the center. And there's advancements on every front on that, and the Russians are not getting stopped. In the center, I think I mentioned they took this train line. They also managed to clear out the Bakhmut dachas here. These were lost during the Ukrainian Bakhmut counteroffensive, but they were regained, and now the Russians are trying to take this area right here. So they are they're pushing out from Bakhmut. They are pushing in the south, where they're right now clearing out the trench lines in this area right here. They're pushing, trying to flank Bogdanovka. And they are right now putting pressure to taking the hills, the main dominant heights in the southern, to push the Ukrainians away from Klishevka and Andriivka. So there's a lot of Russian progress here, we'll have to see how that develops as well. There's also been, in part of this Bakhmut front, I call this the Severitsk front, mostly in the south here. So the Russians actually did a surprise offensive across the river from Sako-Vincenti. They actually crossed the river here and developed a bridgehead here. You actually could see the extremely heavily fortified areas here. Now that the maps are being updated, you could see all these trench lines here that the Ukrainians built. So, this is not, a lot of people see the old maps, are like, why aren't they advancing? Well, it's because of these trench lines here. And so, the Russians crossed the river here and actually developed a bridgehead, and I don't know what the purpose of this is. Maybe they're trying to advance on Ferdivka, but it's very interesting to see, here's another defense. You can see all these trenches here. But anyway, it's interesting to see what the Russians have planned here. Maybe this is just another pinning operation. They don't want to send, Ukrainians have a lot of troops in Seversk, and they're like, hey, this front is quiet. Let's send them to Bakhmut. I think this is more of a pinning operation. They also got closer to Rozdivka. They took this tree line right here this week and got closer to Rozdivka, and along with this, they are continuously advancing to the north along the rail line and took more area in this sector. They're trying to basically encircle Visola. I think they're trying to basically make this into a deeper pocket, and because all these are just open fields, and it's going to be very hard to, I think they're trying to collapse these fields and force the Ukrainians to retreat more to the north, to the southern part of Seversk here. And, so basically pushed and decrease the pressure on Soledar and then increase the pressure on Seversk, basically. So there's been advancements here in the Seversk front for the first time in a long while as well. Another big thing to mention is another part of the one thing I want to mention before is that the Ukrainians made an attack, as you know, about a month ago to try to break through in Gorlovka. They managed to take a waste heap here. I think it was this one, I believe. And after they took it, there was a lot of fighting, and then this week the Russians managed to do an attack and push the Ukrainians back to the pre-war front lines. And so this front is back to normal. So I think this was just a distraction operation trying to bring troops away from Bakhmut and Avdiivka. Nice try from the Ukrainians, but obviously wasn't enough. Another part of the Donetsk front, which is Marinka. Now, the thing with Donetsk is the whole purpose of this offensive is to push the Ukrainians away from Donetsk. And in Marinka, there's actually two purposes. So one is obviously pushing the Ukrainians away from the southern part of Donetsk. Let's talk about the progress first, though. First, there was geolocated footage confirming that the Russians are in full control of the western outskirts of Marinka here. There was a Russian flag being planted here. Along with this, we saw that the Ukrainians were bombing Russian positions in this area right here, in this kind of like farming complex here, in these areas. So the Russians are right now battling to take this area. They also managed to take along Ivano-Franka Street right here, so they secure this area. And basically, the Russians are under 100%, have Marinka under 100% control. Depends if you want to like. You could see Grigorivka here, but you could see these little buildings right here. Where does Marinka begin or end, and where does Grigorivka begin? That is a philosophical question. Well, probably not. There's probably some administrative border, but it just depends on your definition. But Marinka itself is basically under full Russian control, and now this area between Marinka and Grigorivka is where the Russians are fighting. And so I actually have another map here from my Twitter thread to talk about it. So the Russians have activated in Marinka, and they are now in they are now battling for the buildings between Marinka and Grigorivka, and they are trying to advance to this kind of intersection, like this roundabout here, just for defensive purposes. So what's the purpose of? So let me just talk about the updates and kind of what's the purpose of all of them. So they've advanced in Marinka. They've taken the westernmost part confirmed, and they are now clearing the northwesternmost area of Marinka as well. And this week they took this area right here. We can see the Rybor's map here for Marinka here. We can see how they've advanced, here. And so what's the whole point of Marinka? I have this in my Twitter update here. So this first line right here is Marinka has two purposes. First is to push the Ukrainians away from Donetsk, and the second I'll get back to in a second, because it involves the same front. I don't know what to call this front. I think I would call it the Ugledar front, and I'll tell why in a second. A lot of Russian sources say this is the South Donetsk area. So the first part of the Russians in Marinka is to basically have an operational space in Marinka, and basically once they have developed this is where the intermediate goal is for this winter, or at least for this month. And then the Russians want to push and continue pushing the Ukrainian artillery away, because just taking Marinka isn't enough. They need to push all the way to the big town of Karakova. This is a huge industrial logistic area. This is a very strong Ukrainian defense node. It is a command center. It is the command center. It is the logistics hub of the whole South Donetsk front. What does that mean? It's for Ugledar, it's for Marinka, it's for Novomykhailovka, and it's for Velika Novosoloka. This entire area is centered around Karakova as being the center of defense nodes here. And so the Russians want to do is to develop their offensive from here and push the Ukrainians all the way back to around this area. You could see Karakova. You could see, this river, these other, these heavily, urbanized area. So this will be where the Ukrainians will make their new defense node. But they need to push but once the Ukrainians are pushed back here, they won't be able to shell Donetsk anymore. So that's the purpose of Marinka itself. Not only that, as I say here, they're going to try to advance to this river reservoir. They're going to take Grigorivka, and they'll also take Mishka, this long ass name. And just for the purposes of pushing them back to this area. And then the immediate goal of reaching here has two purposes. Not only will this secure Russian gains, once they're here, they'll be able to flank Krasnogorivka here. This is another area the Ukrainians use to shell Donetsk, and so just pushing them from the south is not enough. They'll have to basically encircle them from the behind here and collapse this defense node here. However, to do that, they'll have to develop their positions in Nivolska in these fields here. These fields are, the new Ukrainian defense line has a river, they have some villages, while here it's just open fields. And so this is a very tough cookie to crack. But they need to take these fields for the Ukrainians to push back here. Otherwise, they could continue supplying Krasnogorivka from the north. But basically, this threatens to collapse Ukrainian defense, this area of Donetsk where the Ukrainians could still shell Donetsk here. And so that's the first goal of the Marinka operation, which is to, and so now that they finally capture Marinka, we will now beginning to see the battle for Grigorivka. Or maybe they stop, but I don't think they will. Now, I said that's the first thing. The second thing is that the Russians began the battle for Novomykhailovka here. The Russians managed to enter, let's go down to they managed to enter the cemetery here. They managed to actually enter, they are on the eastern outskirts of Novomykhailovka. They managed to basically enter these, they took everything right up to the village itself and actually took the graveyard, the cemetery. And so the battle for Novomykhailovka has begun, as we can see in this area from Rybar. And so what's the whole purpose of that? So that's the update, that the Russians they entered Novomykhailovka and the battle for the town has begun. They also actually managed to advance to the south after the liberation of Marinka. They are now getting closer to Podbeba, I think it's called. It sounds weird. But they managed to advance closer along this road, and they actually managed to move along these tree lines more as well. The Ukrainians have a very solid strong point here. I think this is like the pig farm or something. But it prevented the Russians from being able to attack Novomykhailovka from the north. And so the Russians are like, instead of trying to push our heads against this area, we're going to attack Novomykhailovka from the south here. And so now the battle for Novomykhailovka has begun. They are pushing in the north. They have entered from the south. And that's the update. But what's the purpose of Novomykhailovka? Well, it's the second point. So, obviously first thing is that they actually want to secure what they call let's go here, one of the main logistics hubs of the Russians, which is Volnovavka here. This is one of the main rail hubs that the Russians used for defense here. And because this is where the rail line goes, you actually could see the rail line, I believe, here. Yeah, this rail line goes all the way to Volnovavka, but as you can see, it's super fucking close to Ukrainian lines. The Ukrainians could actually, I think, shell this area. And so they want to push the Ukrainians away from this rail line, because this is, for right now, they're building new rail lines, but for now, for the next year or two, this is going to be the only rail logistics support for the southern land bridge of Russia. Besides Crimea, but obviously this this is obviously a choke point, and so they want to have a land bridge with a rail connection. They have roads, but they don't have, the rail line goes super close. So pushing them away from the South Donetsk Ugledar front is essential for securing and pushing Ukrainians away from the rail line. But besides that, is there any other purpose? Well, they want to, as I mentioned before, this South Donetsk area is the center of all, this pushing from Novomykhailovka will allow the Russians to finally capture Ugledar. As we saw last winter, Ugledar is this super fortified high-rise building area. We could see it here. Actually, I think I could see some defenses here, some trenches. But it's all high-rise buildings. It's all high-rise in a sea of fields. And so it's very hard. The Russians tried to attack it directly, and they failed. And so the Russians are now trying to basically, I put it here as that Karakva, as I mentioned, is the logistics and command center for this entire front. But Marinka not only secures the northern flank of the Russian one of the main Russian pushes is to push from Novomikhailivka, and basically once they take it, just do like what I call village hopping. Next part will be Konstantinovka here. They'll have to take this area, and they'll continue moving north until they reach this intersection right here near Uspanivka here in this intersection, because then the Ukrainians in Ugledar are cut off from supply, and they could be attacked from the south. And when they're cut off from supply and could be flanked, then Ugledar will collapse, and this will give the Russians the dominant height position here. And so Novomikhailivka is Marinka. The second part of Marinka is to basically support the northern flank of this Novomikhailivka push, so that they could collapse Ugledar and basically then collapse the whole South Donetsk area and push the Ukrainians back to their new defense line here. This will not only give the Russian rail line here breathing space and protection from conventional Ukrainian artillery, but it will basically this entire bulge here will collapse, and the Ukrainians will have to fall back here. And this will also complicate Ukrainian positions in the Velika Novoskolka front. So that's the purpose there. The Russians are now beginning Operation Novomikhailivka. They took Marinka. They are now going to continue advancing north. We can see that here. And this is my like arrow showing of where they're going to fight. They're not going to take Karakova because that's too big, and it rests on the new Ukrainian defense point. But they're going to stop like right in front of it. So that's the South Donetsk area. There's been no changes on the Velika Novoslovka front. There's been no real changes on the Zaporozhye front. The Russians are advancing. A lot of Ukrainian sources are saying there's been an uptick in pressure. Here, the Russians took a tree line in the north of Verbova. They took a tree line to the west of Robotyna, basically trying to undo Ukrainian progress and make it a harder position to keep their positions in Robotyna. But no big changes in this area. But the Russians are on the attack here as compared to before when the Ukrainians were on the attack. But they are still trying to liquidate this salient, but the Russians are now on the attack here, but it will take a while for them to liquidate it because it's a lot of slow progress. One thing about Krinky is that there's been no changes on the Kherson front, but again, their clashes are continuing in Krinky. There's been a lot of reporting in this area that the Russians lost, the Ukrainians have a very fucking tough time supporting their positions here. There's been Western sources interviewing Ukrainian Marines here and saying, yeah, we just get sent here to be cannon fodder, and we're just getting blown up to bits for no purpose. I still think the Ukrainians will do another attack, probably in the Kinburn Spit or some other area, but I don't think they were as stupid as just to make one area here. But I think I think the Ukrainians will do another attack, but for now, this is just a meat grinder. Ukrainians keep sending Marines here to get slaughtered. But, however, when the Russians try to kick the Ukrainians out of Krinky, they actually get blown up. There's been a lot of videos of Russian armored vehicles being destroyed in this forest, trying to attack Krinky. So Ukrainians obviously have a good position here where they can fight back. So the Russians can't push them out, but they can't really expand out of Krinky. So it's just basically a meat grinder for really no purpose unless it diverts Russian attention where the Ukrainians can make another bridgehead. Let's see. And let's talk about the Oskol front, the Luhansk front. In the Liman direction, there was actually a small breakthrough. There was like some sources showing that the Russians broke through here and are now operating in this area right here. And so this forest is stagnant. There's trenches everywhere. There is strong points everywhere. This is a heavily forested area. It's very hard to push through. But this small breakthrough here complicates Ukrainian defenses here. And so the Russians have a chance here to basically collapse a big part of the forest, which will help Russians continue their offensive here. But nothing super big, but, again, it's a small little breakthrough the Russians could exploit to take more of this forest. And at the very least expand their zone of control. The Ukrainians didn't attack towards Dubrova. Dubrova is still under Russian control, but they managed to actually get closer to this. So the Ukrainians are trying to stop the Russian pressure on this Serebransky forest here. No other changes on the Luhansk front. One thing to mention on near the Kupinsk area of this Luhansk front is that the Russians are still trying to break into Sinkovka and break through what I call the Klishevka town defenses. The Russians are battling over the tree line in front of Ivanivka here. This goes back and forth, but they haven't been able to break through here to encircle Klishivka here. So the battles for this town strong points are continuing. The Russians are in the northern outskirts of Sinkovka, but the battles are still ongoing. It's hard. I think the Russians here are not as good. I mean, unless Ukrainian defenses are just so on point, but it's just that Russian positions, they've been pushing here for a while and they have not been able to break through. The Russians are on the attack. They're trying to take Sinkovka. They're trying to break through Klishivka by attacking Ivanivka to encircle it and push the Ukrainians back. The whole purpose of this is to get to Kupinsk here. Basically try to begin the battle for Kupinsk. But until these two areas fall, Sinkovka and Klishivka, then this will not happen. But right now those fortified areas stand, so Kupinsk is still safe. So lots of things going on. This has been a long video, I could tell. I've been talking a lot, but yeah, there's been a lot of changes. The Ukrainians are on the back foot. The Russians are on the offensive for their winter campaign. The Russians, there's been, so that's been the front. There's been a lot of back and forth between Zelensky and Zaluzhny about. A lot of people are questioning Zelensky's logic, and a lot of people are thinking Zaluzhny is more rational. So there's been some power play in Kiev. The U.S. is still trying to decide on more another aid package to Ukraine, but it's been stopped because of disagreements with border policy, which is ironic because they want to spend $6 billion to defend Ukraine's borders, but they don't want to spend a penny defending America's border. So it's kind of ironic. Putin made his another big address. He actually mentioned that Odessa is a Russian city. And from that discussion, it kind of gives you a hint of what the Russians have planned for Ukraine. Obviously, and from what I gathered, it looks like the Russians will try to basically take the most pro-Russian areas of Ukraine, basically the south and the east, and then have the western and maybe central part of Ukraine be under a puppet regime. Honestly, kind of like Belarus, basically, where Belarus is technically independent, but very close to Russia. Same thing will happen with western and central Ukraine. That's probably what the Russians want. The thing with Odessa is that the Russians will have to make a bridgehead in Kherson, and basically it's going to be it's basically impossible. Well, not impossible, but it's going to be extremely hard for them because once they withdrew from this position, it's going to be very hard for them to continue their offensive here, very hard to develop towards Odessa. So Odessa will be one of the last things to take. So Putin saying Odessa is a Russian city is very big in terms of that they have bigger plans beyond just the 4 oblasts that they want to take. So that's the end of this video. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you really liked this video. If you liked it, please give it a thumbs up and comment your thoughts and subscribe to my channel if you want to see more videos similar to this one. So aim high and wander on.